Hind and welcome to Dev Talks. This is Aadi. The air war in Ukraine probably a turning factor for the Russians. A lot of people believe that the Russians have not done what needed to be done to win this war swiftly. A lot many believe that the Russians do not have the capability. A lot many believe that the Russians were taking an easy hand onto Ukraine while using their air power. What is the reality? It's all merged in this whole narrative war, which is ongoing. To make some sense of the air operations and the advantages, disadvantages, and some lessons of this war, I have with me Air Marshal Anil Khosla, who's going to tell us about the Russian air offensive, the Ukrainian air offensive, and what else is happening in that theater of conflict. Sir, thank you so much for joining me. It's an interesting subject, very less spoken about, and it's shrouded in mystery, as a matter of fact, today.
Thanks, Aadi. It's a very, very live topic, and last 15 days, a lot of action has gone through, and a lot of analysis and opinions have been expressed in media, and as would happen normally. And now the situation has come where some reconciliatory tone is being adopted by both sides, and hopefully the madness will stop and in whatever way. And you rightly said that the fog of war is very, very high. But still, in this fog also, there are certain preliminary lessons to be drawn. And as the fog settles down, things become clearer. More specific lessons can come out. So before we start, Adi, I will take 2-3 minutes to put a few things in perspective.
Certainly, sir.
So, I'll start with air power. So, like a lot of speculation is going on. I mean, I will cover subsequently what sort of not allegations, what sort of speculations and what sort of reasoning has been given for use or non-use of air power. So, air power is not a very well understood subject. It has got a lot of potential. It has got a lot of peculiarities. Even the users of the air power at times, are confused. I must say that it's not a one-size-fit-all solution air power that you come and bring in your aircraft and you bomb the hell out of enemy and the morale goes down and you distract them and put them into submission. It's not like that. I mean, it doesn't work every time like that. So for every peculiar situation, you have to have a separate air campaign, a separate design, a separate this thing. So the air campaign has to be tailored towards the objectives, the political objectives, the military objectives. Then what are the adversaries' weaknesses? What is the prevailing environment? What are the conditions? And there might be some constraints. Okay, then you decide how to use the air power. Okay, the second is, you see the disparity between the two countries. I will not go into bean counting, but if you broadly say, as far as the Air Force is concerned, one is the second largest Air Force in the world and one is 27th position by some calculations. Okay, and you see the disparity. The numbers are, totally different. We see Air Force wise, it is almost 8 to 10 times Russian Air Force as compared to Ukrainian. Army is about 4 times to 5 times Russian Army. If you just take a broad beam counting of tanks and APCs and manpower, similarly aircraft, fighter aircraft, helicopters. So roughly you come to these figures. So disparity. Okay. Third thing which I want to bring out, which you already mentioned, any operations, any war, or any skirmish, or whatever you want to call it, truth is the first casualty. Okay. And what is the truth? You don't come to know immediately while the action is on. There are two reasons for it. One is the fog of war, which means the information doesn't come through easily. And second is the information warfare, which has become very, very potent now. Misinformation, fake news, propaganda. And in that, you don't know what to believe and what not to believe. So we are in that phase at the moment. So I must say, one is we don't know what to believe and what not to believe. And secondly, in this case, the information warfare has been taken over by the West. They're dominating it. So they are making you believe what they want you to believe. So we should be cautious about that. So this is a very important thing which I wanted to bring out in the perspective before we start the question answer and further discussion on the topic. Yeah, Adi.
Oh, yes, sir. There's a lot which is mixed up in these whole reels. And, a lot of people are saying, yeah, what bombing are you talking about? There are people roaming around on the streets in Kiev when what siege are
Yeah.
we talking about. But there is a whole lot that we don't know about before commenting.
Yeah.
I think it's a little difficult. So let's start with Russia.
Yeah.
I'd like you to kind of explain to me about the air power at potential with the Russians, and how things kind of spanned out for them.
Yeah. So, very valid point. Russia started the so-called special operations, and we should start with Russia. So, of course, firstly, all my whatever opinion I give are my own personal opinion and information gathered from open sources. Uh, I would like to tag 4 or 5 things as far as air power used by Russia is concerned. So, firstly, as I said, all this information is coming in bits and pieces, and we are trying to piece together. And so, let's start with what information has come through. In brief, not going into every detail. So, apparently, on first day they used ballistic missiles, long-range vectors from the air as well as ground-launched platforms, and what comes out in the media is they fired almost 300 odd missiles on the first day. They targeted 11 odd airfields. They targeted 70 odd military targets, 83 targets in total, including some MODAM, some C2 command and control centers. And as per the claim is concerned, they claim that they suppressed the AD system of the Ukraine. And they also targeted the long range SAMs, which Ukraine possesses. Then they targeted all the early warning radars throughout Ukraine. So, in other words, what they're saying is they also created airfields, operating surface, runways, and taxi tracks. So, in other words, in the opening salvo, what they're claiming is that they blinded the air defense of Ukraine. They put the air power of Ukraine down quite a bit, and that's what they have achieved. So it was a big operation, and as expected, which will happen in the opening salvos of wars, any war. And what I have gathered from the open sources also, there was some attempt, and they took over one of the airfield north of Kiev, and to make it as a bridgehead, which apparently they tried it out. That we'll talk about subsequently. But apparently, they could not sustain it, and no link up could take place, and the airfield went back to Ukrainians. I mean, this is all you don't know what is the truth actually. So this is all what happened on the first day. Okay, now what is happening is everyone is talking about that there was no follow up thereafter. The use of air power stopped, and they didn't go into full-fledged air campaign. It's like initiating a war, stunning the enemy, and not going for the kill. You understand? The philosophy is that you stun the enemy, you create chaos, and in their chaotic condition, when he's totally disorientation, go and finish him off. That is what any war will do. But why haven't they done it? Okay, they've done very limited offensive counter air. They have capability. They have 300 odd aircraft committed on ground. What I'm told, open sources, that only 75 aircraft are taking active part. Why are they doing this? Why so less? They have capable aircraft. They have Su-35. They have Su-30s, capable of multi-role, capable of AD specific, capable of ground attack. Why aren't they using it? That is a question which comes. Then what they're doing is, instead of using the offensive counter air and taking over the full control of the air, they are doing symbolic targeting now. Symbolic targeting, when I say, they're targeting the transmission stations, they're targeting the nuclear power stations, things like that, some military targets. Somebody criticized, why are they bombing empty square? I mean, what are they achieving? I mean, that is the most ridiculous thing to do. But what you should understand is, it's a symbolic, when it's a symbol of revolution. And that empty square, if you're putting a bomb in it, you're giving a signal. So it has got a value. It's not that, you're doing it at random. Okay, so that is what is happening in the second. Now comes the third part, Aadi, which you also mentioned. A lot of reasons are being attributed. A lot of criticism is coming in that Russians have got very poor planning. Their tactics is very poor. Their tactical air force still, the training is involved is very less. Somebody came out with the figures. The pilots are doing only 100 to 120 hours a day as compared to double the amount of what Westerners do. They're scared of fratricide. There is no night capability with Russia. Lack of PGMs. The PGMs are not good enough. I mean, there's no end to criticism which is coming in. And one person said they are preserving their high value assets. They're not exposing them. Yeah, if the war is on or if the thing is on, why should you preserve your high value assets? It's not for keeping in the drawing room. Yeah, you've created the capability to use it when required, isn't it? So these are the reasons being attributed. Now these are all Western generated this thing. My opinion is totally different from this. Okay, after all, Russia or when the USSR was a big empire, he was a world power. Yeah. Okay, it's not that overnight they have come out with this Air Force. They also seen life. They also seen action. They have been world power. Their tactics, their technology, their aircraft, their platform, their weapons have evolved over the years, and they're no fools. I mean, give them some credit. Yeah. So what I want to bring out in this thing is, okay, all this criticism is fine, but main reason to my mind is, uh, lies in the Putin's opening statement. One is he said, war not against Ukrainian people. Okay, not even military. He said, military, if you put down your arms and go away, we'll let you go. So he's not even fighting the military. He's not even fighting the common people. His war is against the fascist rulers who are going towards NATO or the West. Okay. So now, if you see in this, why should he kill people, innocent people here? Why should he target, population centers? Why should he destroy the country? Okay. Then, secondly, if you see, he's not called it a war. He's not called it anything. He's called it special military operation. Okay. So obviously, he doesn't want to overkill. Okay. He doesn't want too much of destruction. Okay. And if he uses air force or air power in a full way, air power is offensive weapon. Yeah, there'll be a lot of destruction. There'll be a lot of collateral damage also at times. Okay. So keeping that in mind, I feel because the whole warfare, another factor is taking place in an urban area. It's an urban warfare. It's not a classic, army is dug in and, you're in the fields, open fields, you're fighting each other. It's an urban warfare. Now, in the urban warfare, how do you, take out one individual and start firing without collateral? So, keeping these in mind, I think he's being very, very cautious. That is why he's not going full bore on the use of air power. There's another angle to it, Adi. One is in the long run, if you think of it, if he overkills, if he overdestructs, and if he uses too much of power, what will happen? He is alienating people. In the world opinion, he gets alienated. Back home in Russia, he gets alienated. After all, Ukrainians are their own people here. At one time, they were in the same country. Correct. Second angle to it is if he uses overkill or over destruction, in the long run, he's creating a problem for himself in terms of resistance movement, in terms of revolution, in terms of insurgency. It'll provide fan to all these things, and it will become a long-term problem for him. Okay, so he's following a very very delicate approach. Okay, now a little bit of crystal gazing or looking into the mind of the commanders and this thing. I'll make an attempt. To my mind, he is used the air power in the beginning to give us some symbolic shot, and plus he's already destroyed most of the Ukrainian air force, or at least put them down, and he's not followed it up with the overkill. He's not targeting population centers. So in the what is happening is he will withhold air power and absorb the losses and still try and achieve his objectives without using too much of destruction and too much of air power. But the problem is he will go in a calibrated manner. Okay, gradual increase. Now, in case the things don't work out, the fear is he might escalate, go up the escalatory ladder and use more and more of destructive power. So that is what will happen. In case the thing gets delayed too long, he might escalate and use more power. Okay, the next aspect is, of use of air power, where likely in the future is the Westerners have been making a lot of noise, although they're not giving direct support to Ukrainian, but some things came out of the news, 17,000, 20,000 anti-tank weapons and shoulder-fired missiles are being provided by West for the Ukraine to fight. They have already supplied them in Poland. Okay, now from Poland, they have to go to Ukraine. They have to go all over. How will they go? They will go in convoys or they'll go into logistics. So Putin has already given a warning that in case you come in for the supplies and all that, I'm going to get into warfare there. It will be a direct act of war. So that is second area where, in case some supplies start coming from there, he may extend the use of air power towards the west to interdict these convoys. So that is the second area where it can come into play. The air power I'm talking about. Okay, I will take a minute more. I know I have taken a bit long because this media thought process and criticism is going on for quite a bit of time. Also criticism is going on that why has he opened three fronts? Why couldn't he just concentrate in case his military objective, in case his objective was political? That means overthrow the government of Ukraine and put in this thing or take over control of Kiev. Why not only concentrate on Kiev and come from the north? He's actually, if you think of it, his objectives is quite a smart move. North, why? Because Kiev is the closest from the north. Okay, if you come from Romania side, distance you have shown on the map in one of your episodes. Okay, why east? East because of the two provinces with their declared independence and they have supported the DPR and the EPR is in the north. So in the east. So obviously he'll come into the east and give them support and push away or control the Ukrainian forces there. South is a very smart move from Crimea side. Cut off the whole country, Ukraine, the access to the sea. So it's a very, very smart move to my mind. I mean, three objectives are there, and he's achieving all those by going into three and not diluting his effort. So in the other way around, he was dividing the Ukrainian forces into three different fronts. Otherwise, they would have been concentrated only in the north in case he had done it action only in the north. So these are the few of the dynamics of the use or non-use of the air power as far as Russia is concerned, in my opinion. Yeah, Aadi.
So, absolutely agree with you. So, these three are like a pincer that he's trying to do, a very, very large scale pincer. Obviously, Ukraine is about 1,100 kilometers in its width. If I'm mistaken, it's somewhere around that much. It's a large sort of a thing, but at the end of it, one can also ideate a factor that in case he has to keep on going with the war, he basically could, break the country into half at one time. So you've brought it out very, very well. And this is actually not being discussed with regard to the three-pronged approach that he's taken, sir. So air power used by Ukraine, of course, there's a lot of narrative, Ghost of Kiev and stuff like that. A lot of MiG-29 pilots have written about it that in one day, these kind of kills are not possible on a MiG-29 because of the short flying range and the fuel capabilities of that aircraft. And plus, if nothing else, the pilot, he'll probably lose almost 30 kgs of weight in 2 days because of the sheer G-forces. So a lot of people have written about it, and I actually don't want to get onto the Ghost of the Kiev part. But what I want to actually ask you is about what do you see how the Ukrainians have used whatever little air power they had across to this thing. Rumor has it Ukraine still has a lot of its air power stored up in the West. Some of it has gone over to Romania and all that stuff. And, one small other thing is that how do you think they've used their air defense? Because they also have S-300s and, other very, very good systems. So how do you think that has happened, sir?
Yeah. So very rightly said, you brought in, the Ghost of Kiev. You can't talk about Ukraine air power use and not talk about Ghost of Kiev. It gives you a lot of heartburns to people like me, who that a person has got opportunity to kill 6 of the enemy aircraft and in one day and maybe 10 odd in the next 3-4 days. You feel sad that you never got such an opportunity. That is on the lighter vein. Anyway, the second thing, yeah, you're right. Some news came out that, the Ukrainian forces have fled to like what Iraqis did, the air assets to Iran, in this case to Poland for preserving them and all. And it doesn't work out in the long run. During the war, it's very difficult for them to come back or to bring them back. We'll talk about it a little bit more. So I want to tag 2 or 3 things as far as air power used by Ukraine is concerned. First, I've already covered in what Russia did, and they put down considerable amount of Ukraine Air Force in the beginning itself. Okay, and their AD systems also. But concept or philosophy of use wise, maybe 2 or 3 things Ukraine. One is, Ukraine's response is mainly AD centric, if you notice. Okay. And basically revolving around air defense. Okay. Second is hinted at it's a urban guerrilla warfare sort of tactics which is being used. anti-tank weapons for both surface forces as well as for the air, this thing. Shoulder-fired missiles, anti-tank weapons, shoulder-fired anti-aircraft missiles. So that is what being used. Now, when you're using these, it's very, very difficult to, pinpoint these because they are mobile. They, he shoots and runs, they hide somewhere. It's very difficult to take them out and this thing. They cause attrition, a certain amount, but not a big deal in case the Air Force is, like Russian Air Force is a big one. Okay. Second is what they're doing is they're using the air that is in a limited use of it in a air defense role, but plus also that is the fighters I'm talking about, but they're using UAVs.
Yeah.
Okay, unmanned UAVs, but they're also very limited. One report said they had only 20 of these Turkish this thing. So one report said more came in during the war, and more are expected. But how will they come in logistically is a question mark. So these are the aspects as far as use of Ukraine. This thing. Second thing is the news items which are coming in. Okay, the reservists are flying. Okay, that is an interesting thing. You've also got the news one display pilot who's got thousands of hours and display and very renowned chap, and he's got killed and because he was a reservist, he came in. Anyway, the concept of reservist is a concept followed by a lot of countries. It's worth looking at. Okay, Ghost of Key we have talked about. I think it was more of a propaganda than sort of a morale booster for the forces rather than truth. But he may have got one odd kill, but not to the extent which is being exaggerated. Okay, next aspect is about Poland. Or there's the issue of MiG-29s being offered by Poland. It reminds me of Pakistan when US was exiting from Afghanistan. They wanted a base in Pakistan to operate the UAVs to support the Afghani government. And Pakistan, took the opportunity and said, "You give the UAVs to us, we'll operate them." So similarly, Poland is also trying maybe to derive mileage out of it. First they said, "We'll give MiG-29s, and in exchange of F-16s from US." Now, latest they're saying is, okay, we'll not give it directly because they don't want to get directly involved with Russia. So they're saying we'll position it with NATO in Germany, and then US or NATO can transfer it and all. It's a no-go. I mean, obviously, NATO is not getting involved in it. And how do you, transfer aircraft in the middle of a war? And Putin has very clearly said he's put the nuclear saber on one side, and he's shown his willingness to use it also. I mean, in a very, very strong way. And he's given a very stern and strong warning that in case you come in or in case you assist like this, I mean, it's a direct war as far as this thing. And nobody wants to go into a World War sort of 3 scenario where escalated to such levels. So these are the aspects. Now, also the news came, the biggest transport aircraft, got damaged. Very unfortunate for an aviator to know about it. And it's a masterpiece. It's a marvel in itself. And anyway, so collateral is there. Okay, now what is happening is the third part of it is it's become a sort of, as far as air war is concerned, it's become a part of sort of war of attrition. Okay, where Russia is using some air power coming in, either helicopters, attack helicopters, or fixed wing, or whatever it is, just limited. Ukraine is using air defense weapons, shoulder fired mainly, and whatever is left. And it's become sort of a war of attrition. Now, in this war of attrition, what happens is the side which has got numerical superiority or numerical advantage will obviously be able to absorb whatever losses are there. It's just a question of weight. So there's no meaningful or significant contribution to the war or the outcome will come through. And maybe one of the speculations saying that Russia is preserving his high value assets could be one of the reasons. Yeah, so he will, why not? When he wants it, he will use it, and this thing called calculated risk. So he will take that, and at the moment he doesn't feel the need, he won't use it. And if he feels that he can manage the objective without using them, by all means he will do that. So what I'm getting at is the war of attrition will go in favor of Russia in case it carries on like this. So Ukraine usage is very, very low, and it's sort of a urban urban warfare sort of a concept. Yeah.
When you were explaining this, one news came to mind where the Russian, the general in charge for this operation was saying that they're firing anti-aircraft rockets and all this stuff from, populated areas. when we retaliate, obviously there's going to be problems. So please tell your army not to do this so that we don't disturb the civilians. I mean, it was a funny thing that they actually are talking about this stuff. Okay, you want to fire, please fire from somewhere else. Don't do it from civilian areas because our radars will pick it up and then we'll hit you. So there are two sides to the story, sir, and that's my next question. The reported losses that we can see. At one time I remember the Kiev Independent putting it on Twitter that today we shot down 7 Russian aircraft. It's supposedly called the worst day for the Russians. I think it was the fifth or sixth, between the fifth, sixth, or the seventh, if my memory serves me right, sir. That is point number one. Secondly, we also see these photographs of pretty much all the downed Russian aircraft, but not one photograph of any downed Ukrainian aircraft. There's only one image that came out where a bombed out airfield with about 8-10 of these MiG-29s were literally, burnt to a crisp because of Russian bombing. How do you kind of picture the narrative war along with this whole reported losses and, this entire game of the Russians actually telling these guys not to fire their air defense weapons from populated areas and so on and so forth? So this whole narrative thing with regards to losses, sir.
So before I take on the question, two quick responses. One is earlier also in wars, what has happened is people have put their assets, high value assets, in the middle of the populated area. In some countries, they put their aircraft and all into children's park or the parks and in the middle of the cities and all, thinking that the enemy will not target them. It has happened before also. So as I said, as I called it, it is sort of a urban guerrilla warfare. Okay. Next thing you rightly brought out, the media wise, very interesting thing you brought out. Why is Russia not advertising? Number of kills. A very valid point you brought out. I'm going to cover it later, but I'll cover it here itself. Same reason. What I told you, the earlier reason. Why is using delicately the air power? Same reason he is not overblowing his trumpet. He's not only blowing his trumpet, he's not doing false propaganda and trying to show that, I've destroyed so much, I've destroyed the Ukrainian Air Force, I've put them down. He doesn't want to do that because, it'll go against him, that he's causing over destruction. And the reasons I've already covered it. So he's going slow on the media narrative, whereas the Ukraine, along with the West assisted, they are going full bore into media warfare or the info warfare. Okay. That is a second perspective which I wanted to tell you. Now, narrative-wise, very straightforward. The West is both are trying to, in any war, both try to justify. There's a thing called legitimacy. I'll talk about it later. So, West story is that Russia is the aggressor and they are into their empire building they want their USSR heydays back. And Ukraine is the victim, innocent victim. And the West is supporting like a holy cow from outside and supporting the Ukraine. Russian story is, that US-led NATO is the aggressor. And they have pushed them against the wall. And 15 years we have been crying, horse, don't do it, don't do it. They're expanding and now they're coming at the door of the Russia, which is not acceptable. They've crossed the red line. And hence I'm forced to do this action. So these are the two narratives, very straightforward. Now comes the media. As you rightly brought out, the whole lot of things are coming out as far as media is concerned, that Ukraine is still flying, it's causing very heavy casualties on Russia. In one of the reports, you'll be shocked. I mean, I really think there's 12,000 troops personnel have been killed, 300 plus tanks, 1,000 plus APCs, 126 artillery guns, 470 vehicles, and 7 UAVs have been shot down of Russia. I don't know that these many are flying also or not there. Then also 48 fighter aircraft and 80 helicopters of Russia have been shot down. That amounts to 128 aircraft. And if you count UAVs also, that amounts to 135. I mean, it's very hard to believe. What is the truth? Will come out when the fog of war settles down and the dust settles. But at the moment, it's with a pinch of salt, and you have to listen. They also say 3 ships have been sunk of the Russians. Drones have destroyed. They're saying drones have destroyed 32 of their ground vehicles, either tanks or APCs and all. So a lot of credit is being given to the drones. Okay, Ghost of Kiev we talked about. And like one of the media reports says that Russia has lost in 13 days more number of assets than he has lost in 30 years. I mean, this is hard to believe. And also, you see some of the videos which are doing the round, you can make out there the video games which have been circulating around. And beauty of it is, whenever there's a war or a skirmish takes place any part of the world, the same video surfaces there with the name changed. Then also, it was brought out that one of the airfield which they had taken control on the first day, they tried a airborne assault with 18 odd IL-76, out of which 2 were shot down with 300 on board and things like that. I mean, which commander will risk sending a 18 aircraft train of IL-76 with so many people on board, one after the other behind, in case the airspace is still contested and they're not assured of some sort of a immunity from interference from the enemy. I mean, it's hard to believe. So, what is the truth will come out subsequently. Okay, now also criticism is coming out that the Russian Air Force has not been able to gain air superiority. We'll talk about air superiority subsequently. And secondly, there is no coordination between the surface forces and air forces, and they're having heavy losses. Okay, and how far it is true is still to be. Now, some lessons still can come out of this, and some losses are there as far as Russians are concerned. And as I said, he's going into enemy territory. Ukraine has the advantage of the war being fought in his own territory. And there will be losses, of course. There will be losses to manpads, there will be losses to UAVs, anti-tank weapons which are being fired, and he will be able to absorb it. Now, airspace at the moment is still contested. That means contested means both are able to use the airspace, which is called contested airspace. We'll talk about it more. And so, in my opinion, still it holds that whatever claims are being made, we have to take it with a pinch of salt, and we have to wait for some time for the reality to come in. Yeah, Adi.
That is the beauty of the entire thing, sir, because that's I think air superiority, as you kind of mentioned, and if we see war history, even in Bangladesh with India, we kind of pushed the Pakistani Air Force into the ground, and we had complete superiority, and that's gave us a lot of ease to move. There are also flip side questions which are being asked about Ukraine, sir. And a lot of people are saying, in case the Russians have not got air superiority, there is that 40-kilometer long convoy which is there. If Ukraine has the drones and this and that, why aren't they taking advantage of this? And the only reason and only way that they could take advantage is by air. I mean, it's impossible to go and attack that long a convoy with probably a battalion or two of special forces. So there are contradicting factors which are coming out in terms of the air superiority itself, sir. Firstly, do you think that the Russians have superiority, and that's one of the reasons that can be taken for that long convoy, taking a risk, stand in the open? How do you put all this stuff in perspective, sir?
You're right, Adi. You brought out a very valid point. There's a 40-kilometer and some reports 64-kilometer long convoy. Yeah. When you see those pictures, as a fighter, you start drooling. I mean, such a lucrative target here, sitting on ground in one single line here. Forget about specialist weapons, even rockets or guns. If you just make a pass and fire, you can take about 10, 12 of them in one pass itself. Exactly. And such a convoy, if you have the wherewithal of the air, and you can destroy it within not even days, in a matter of hours here. I mean, you can decimate it. That is a word which I can come closest to. So, coming back to the point, air superiority. Unfortunately, our understanding of air superiority and contested airspace is a bit getting warped a little bit. I'll just try and that's what my understanding is. I'll just try to tell you. See, why it is getting distorted is because of the US operations. Now, USA, I was watching one of the stand-up comedian. So he made a statement, we have bombed some 13, 14 countries all over the world, and with the impunity from the air. And this all happened because in the year so-and-so, God gave USA the air superiority. So that's how it starts off. He said, God granted the US Air Force the air superiority. Anyway, so terms are air supremacy, air superiority, and favorable air situation. Okay. Now, what US has been doing is he's been going into countries where there's hardly any opposition here. There is no worthwhile air power. Okay. And even ground forces. So he's been going into countries where there's no worthwhile military there. So obviously he can operate at will here. So that is what has filtered down into the minds of the people, that air superiority means you can use the air freely, but the enemy cannot use it at all. That is what is air superiority. So even if one aircraft of the enemy flies, that means you don't have the air superiority. So it doesn't happen like that. So these terms of air supremacy, air superiority, and favorable air situation, they depend on three things: the degree of what this thing. There are various degrees of control of the air. Okay, one is time. What is the duration? Whether for 1 month, 2 months, you will deny enemy flying into that airspace, or matter of few hours or a days. The second is coverage, the extent. In your entire country, I won't let you fly. Only in the eastern sector, I won't let you fly, or whatever it is. And third and most important is, even when you have control of the air to certain extent, there will be some element of enemy air power which will be able to operate. Now that qualifies into extent of enemy interference. So depending on the duration, that is time, coverage, area, and the extent of enemy interference, the degree varies of between air supremacy, air superiority, and favorable air situation. Now, when you go in for operations with a equally strong enemy or reasonably strong enemy, you cannot achieve air supremacy like the US has been operating in those systems. So you come into air superiority or maximum favorable air situation in some cases, in case the enemy is stronger. Also, the concept of air warfare now is changing, where you give limited time of air superiority, limited bubble or favorable air situation for those operations. So you send and pump in so much of air defense offensive weapons from the ground and from the air, that you create a sort of a bubble around the striking forces, and that bubble, you cannot be bust by the enemy. That is what it means. So this is a perspective of air superiority or favorable air situation or air supremacy. So some interference from the enemy will always be there. That will depend on the parity or disparity between the two fighting forces. Okay, then a lot of one other angle I'll bring in. A lot of criticism has come in that some people say cyber has got no meaning in it. It's just a peacetime this thing. No, it got a big meaning in it, especially in the opening salvos. It can create such a chaos. Like imagine if your Air Force is totally networked and you have been able to penetrate the network and put the network down. Now there will be such a chaotic situation that enemy will not be able to operate the way, unless they have some standby measures or plan B available to this thing. So cyber has got a lot of meaning. Cyber attack also took place in this, in the opening salvos. It did happen, but it didn't get publicized so much because obviously media has got more juicy news to cover. Okay, now all the air forces all over the world, they do a clear cut campaign to achieve this degree of whatever you call it, air superiority, favorable air situation, to whatever extent they can. They do that, and that gives you impunity to surface forces to operate freely. And if you don't achieve it, it has a direct bearing on the surface forces. Like example is here. If your convoys are there, they can be interdicted by surface forces. In this case, anti-tank weapons, shoulder fired, and shoot and scoot type of this thing. They'll become vulnerable. Uh, and they will get vulnerable to even air actions, like in this case UAV. That is a better example. If you have a air superiority, then the enemy UAV also can't get airborne, and your surface forces are protected. Okay, so that is the perspective of airspace. So at the moment, what you can say is, in Ukraine, the airspace is still contested. That means both sides can operate to a certain extent, and secondly, uh, when they are operating, the enemy also can interfere with the air operations as well as ground operations. Okay, now coming back to that convoy, you were saying a lot of criticism about this thing and all. Tell me, if there is no air superiority, will he risk so many assets, lives, 64 kilometers of open in a line? Will he risk sending them there to their death? I don't think any commander will do that. Yeah. I mean, if he has a assurance, if he has fair degree of success and knows that the enemy will not be able to interdict from there, then only he'll do it. Another angle to the whole convoy story. Russians have been practicing what is called maskarova. I don't know whether pronunciation is correct or not. It's the art of deception, which includes camouflage and all. Chinese also are very good at it. Basically, Eastern Bloc is very good at deception and camouflage and this thing. Now, if he's put 64-kilometer long convoy, they're not even camouflaged here. In the open, absolutely. I mean, if he is not assured of some certain amount of favorable air situation, will he risk it? No commander will. He'll give them as much of clue. On that note, I think we'll stop at this issue of air superiority. Yeah, Adi.
You, I'm sorry to say so, but you put in more questions in my head than answers. Especially with that last statement, you actually confused me completely, because the narrative war is such, and we all know the deception that was done in the Normandy operations by showcasing a force that never existed. And so I really wonder, have the Russians really invested a huge lot in inflatable vehicles? I'm not sure about that, but it's an interesting paradigm that is being created, that a long convoy with an operational opposing air force, which has certain capability of anti-tank and all that stuff, and still standing in the open. So that's, I think, the bottom line that one must take from what you said, sir. So the Ukrainians have been crying, and even with the reconciliatory note, the first thing I think the president mentioned is stop bombing. And they've been, knocking on an empty door towards the West by saying that implement a no-fly zone and stuff like that. No-fly zones, Iraq, easy, fair enough. No air activity altogether. Afghanistan, fair enough. But they tried it in Vietnam and failed, where the opposition had a strong air force. How do you think they'll be able to do something like this here if they decide to do it? That is a big if right there. And what are your thoughts on this whole process?
Yeah. No-fly zone also, there's a lot of hue and cry going on. Firstly, Ukrainian, obviously, they will ask for any help which can come from the West. Obviously, they will ask for it. And second is, even in America, some protesters saw some videos where they're saying, why don't we implement a no-fly zone? So no-fly zone is easier said than done. It's not a panacea. It's not a solution to everything that I declare Ukraine as no-fly zone. That means tomorrow onwards, when I declare, none of the Russian aircraft will come into the airspace. It doesn't happen like that. Yeah, no-fly zone you can declare, but the point is, can you implement it? That is the question. Okay, so it's not only declaration; it is implementation. Now, how do you implement it? In two ways. One is, what do you need to implement it? You need the wherewithal. You need the radars. Okay, to detect the enemy. Okay, he's coming to that no-fly zone. You need a network of communications to activate all your weapons and guide them towards the enemy. You need weapons, both airborne fighters as well as ground-based. Ground-based, like long-range weapons like S-400, they can also implement a sort of no-fly zone from being on their own side up to whatever their range is. Anything which comes, they can shoot at it. So limited zone, no-fly zone can be achieved by ground-based weapons also. So you need all these things, and more than this, you also need willingness to use, and willingness to use it even at the cost of escalation. Then only no-fly zone has got some value. Now, in this case, Ukraine and sympathizers were asking for it, but US and NATO are denying it. Why? Because of the last reason. They don't want to go into escalation. They don't want to go into a direct war. And no-fly zone, if they declare, if they have to implement, they have to come in. They have to bring in their radars. They have to bring in the communication. They'll have to bring in even if they don't bring in that, at least the fighters will have to come in to shoot down Russians. And if they shoot down one Russian aircraft, it's an act of war. Thereafter, it is escalated. So this is the reason why no-fly zone is not being considered by the West. They don't want direct involvement. They don't want escalation. And I must say here, although the nuclear angle, the saber rattling which Putin did, to my mind, I heard quite a few nuclear analysts with the statement saying that the nuclear deterrence works only against nuclear attacks. Nuclear deterrence doesn't work against conventional attack. But in this case, I have a different feeling now. I've got a different take now. In this case, the nuclear deterrence has worked to keep the Westerners away to cut into conventional war with Russia. That is my take on this. Okay, another. I'll just go away from the topic a little bit. Why it just occurred to me while talking about it. The nuclear threat which is given. One is that he's got the nuclear power. The second is the wordings which is used, and third is he's also conveyed the willingness to use it. How is he conveyed? Is very interesting. Whenever the war and other things take place, a lot of psychological profiling goes on of the enemy commanders and the leaders. In this case, also, if you've seen Putin, he's been, his psychological makeup and his background and is being threadbare discussed in various this thing. So his psychological profiling also indicates person's willingness to use or not to a certain extent. This is, by the way, additional off the cuff this thing. But coming back to the topic, we are talking about no fly zone. Okay, so now I'll give another angle to it. So far we were talking about Western or the Ukraine, Western world or the Ukraine using the no fly zone. Now take it other way around. Russia declaring a no fly zone. Okay, nobody's talked about it. Can you consider that? Now, the scenario can happen where the West aircraft are flying in Poland and Romania and close to Belarus and Russian borders and all. They're flying. They're doing alien mission. They're doing ISR. That's another very important thing. ISR in today's world, to eyes in the sky to gather information, and they're providing int and information to the Ukrainians. They are flying. Now, suppose these weapons which have been supplied, these are reached Poland, and they have to be taken to Ukraine. And suppose the Russia says, okay, Western Ukraine is a no-fly zone. Then what happens? I'm giving another scenario. Okay, he says that if these logistic convoys come, I will use my air and I will interdict them or destroy them. If you interfere, it's a no-fly zone. I'm going to shoot you also down. Okay, and he's given a warning, adequate warning. So that is another possibility. I mean, just thought we're talking about no-fly zone being utilized by West, but here Russia can also use the no-fly zone option. Yeah, Aadi.
It's a kahani mein twist. That is a because
war and weapons are two-edged swords. If one can use it, so can other.
Indeed, and Russians have. I mean, with whatever the Americans can field within Europe, I think the Russians have a huge advantage in terms of. I feel that the Russians have a huge advantage in terms of the kind of equipment and the numbers that it can fleet out, and of course the developed bases that it's got in that particular region. So, another criticism that I heard from a lot of in India, there's always a discussion about various things, and another criticism is about the Russian equipment within India. With the reports of the Su-27s getting shot out of the sky, how many of them are true is not known, but the Sukhois is basically come into a lot of question. How do you look at the Russian equipment within the Indian Air Force? Bottom line, man behind the machine, or machine literally leads the way? Your opinion, sir?
So basically, the two aspects which need addressing, Adi. One is related to equipment availability and serviceability and things like that. And second is related to Russian equipment utilization philosophy. Okay. So first one, enough has been talked about in the media by enough people. I will just not go into details. I will just rush through this thing. The second one is more interesting. I always tell you, the second one is always more interesting than the first one. Okay, if you remember in one of the talks, I think with you said that by 2014, about 8-10 years back, the Russian content in the Indian military was almost 70%. When I say Indian, I'm not talking about Air Force, I'm talking about Air Force, Army, Navy, all three 70%. Now it has reduced to some 58% or something. That's what analysts say. It is gradually reducing. But still, if you take 58% is a large number, we have a lot of equipment which is coming from Russia and this thing. As far as the Air Force is concerned, you have helicopters, Mi-17 fleet, our workhorse is a Russian this thing. We have transport aircraft, N-32. We have fighters, Su-30. Okay, a lot of engines, they come from Ukraine for everything. We have AD weapons now, S-400 is coming in. So we have a lot of equipment from Russia. Okay, and Air Force faced a problem even when USSR broke up. Ukraine had a lot of defense industry, or still has defense industry, but because the contracts were with someone, all those issues came up, and our serviceability went down. So it's not a new thing. We learned our lesson that time. We went through a tough phase, and we instituted some corrective measures. So effect will be there, but it can be surmounted. I mean, temporary, it will go down, when subsequently it may come up again. Okay, supply chain will get disrupted of the spares and others. Serviceability will go down. The other fear is, S-400 delivery might suffer. Okay, sorry, before I come to that, Army and Navy also has got equipment. Army has got, contract of some guns being delivered from there. The Navy is in a big way affected because some frigates are being made there. All the engines, gas turbine engines, come from Ukraine and Russia. We have defense contracts with both Ukraine and Russia. So both will affect. The other effect will be of sanctions, of the West, sanctions which they put on Russia. That may affect the supply chain. That may affect the delivery of new weapons. Like I was telling you, S-400. Now, one battery is already come in. The second one is supposed to be delivered now. And we are contracted for 5. There might be delays in that. Although Russia has assured on 4th or 5th, the minister gave us this thing, that assurance that there will be no delays in the delivery. But practically, it may happen, may not happen. Second thing is, second effect could be American sanctions on us, which has become more difficult now. We're already talking about our S-400 sale, CATSA, that we had talked about it earlier. We were talking about the waiver from US. That may become difficult. Okay, our cost of operation may go up because of various reasons, because of energy crisis, because of spare parts non-availability. So all that will affect us. I mean, it's not that we'll not be affected. Our serviceability will go down, our cost of operations will go down. And I keep coming back to my favorite punchline always, that long run Atmanirbharta is the only solution. I think now, after this war, I've heard so many defense analysts coming out and saying openly that's the only way out. Otherwise, you cannot be reliant on anyone. Okay. So that is one part of it. Now coming to the second part of it, some speculation or some fear is being saying that we have Russian equipment and Russian tactics and philosophy of operation has come under criticism in this war. And so we are also in trouble. I mean, we have that equipment, so we also want to fight like this and have mud on our face. It doesn't happen like that. Okay. We don't follow anybody's philosophy or tactics blindly. That is one of our strong points, actually. We pick up good things from everyone, not only when the equipment comes in, also we do exercises with all the major powers. So during the exercises, we pick up good practices, good tactics, good this thing. And we pick up all these things, and then we have our own organizations, we'll look into it, and we tailor it according to our environment, according to our needs, according to our assets. Okay, and then we use it. When these wars and exercises take place, we refine it further. So it's not. So this is what I wanted to put to rest, that it is not just because we have the Russian equipment that means we are in a doomsday scenario. No, sir. We have the wherewithal to create our own tactics, philosophy of employment, our own doctrines, or our own strategy to use them, and we use it accordingly to our needs. We only buy the equipment from them. Yeah, Adi.
Absolutely, sir. Now, obviously, our training pilots, that makes a huge difference. Abhinandan could shoot down a F-16 and a MiG-21. That talks a huge lot about the kind of training that we do and the kind of will that the pilots would have. So, the last part of this interview, of course, lessons. That's something you just spoke about it. We need to learn from this battle, and You've spoken about Atmanirbharta. I think that is the bottom line which is coming across from this, so-called war, operation, invasion, whatever you want to put it across at. How would you kind of broadly tell us, first and foremost, what kind of lessons we should learn and what they should be, sir?
So, as I said in the beginning, the prelim lessons still can be learned, and more specific ones can come out once the fog settles down. So, three types of I can classify the lessons which come to my mind under three headings. One is the broad lessons related to security scenario. Second is related to warfare, orchestration of the war, and third at lower level, maybe tactical level or lessons specific to the air power. So let's talk about first the broad security lessons. Just 4 or 5 of them. I'll not go into too much of detail, and some of them I have been already covering while talking earlier. So one is very obvious, stated obvious. Nowadays any response to any earlier also it was there, but now it has become more specific. It's a whole of government approach. It's not that military solution when you resort to it's only a military solution. All tools of statecraft under diplomacy, information warfare, military, economy, everything comes into it. And not only during hostility, pre-hostility it starts. Okay, and when the things are hot, all these come into being. Then also not during the war, even after, because of the sanctions and other things, the after effects you have to be proactive in dealing with them. And the other thing is, it's not only wartime, it is also peacetime. Like we talked about gray zone operations, which we talked about. Once again, same thing. Gray zone operations go on between two hostile nations or even nations which are not so friendly. So we have to be, so whole of government approach needs to be done only also in the peacetime to deal with those situations. Anyway, this is the obvious thing. Second thing is regarding collective security. I've spoken about it earlier also that we have not gone into military alliance with anyone. Okay, but in this case, military alliance or tilt towards West is not helped Ukraine at all. You've seen it. Okay, so message is very clear. Everyone will give you diplomatic support. They might share intelligence and information with you. They may help you in information warfare, like they're doing in this cyber warfare. Okay, they may assist you in supplies of weapons, ammo, and spares, which is also very difficult. In a hot time when the war is not started, you can apply, but during the hostilities, very difficult to get in. You've seen it in Ukraine. So, bottom line is that collective security, we still need to keep our mind open. But remember, even in collective security, it's not so easy to get help, but you have to be self-reliant. The second aspect of this collective security is while we are keeping our mind open and not relying on it, we should keep increasing our interoperability, by doing exercises and equipment, procedure, tactics, and all that. Okay. All right. So that is as far as collective security. The third lesson is, our inventory, which has come under criticism long time, whether East dominated, West dominated. We talked about, 70% of West Eastern, then we come down to 60. US is gaining, Israel is gaining. So what is happening is you've seen our situation in this. It's a very, very tightrope walk. We have to abstain from the voting. Okay, it's a tightrope walk, whether you join this camp or that camp, and both of them pressurize you. You have to join our camp. Okay, it's a tightrope walk, not an easy situation for any country. So once again, come back to the normal lesson. Okay, fourth thing is diaspora. Our Indian diaspora is all over the world, and we've seen in time and again wherever situations heat up, we have to go in, we have to look after the interests, we have to get them out. Okay, plans do exist for quite a few places and all, and these are reviewed also, but we need to have more comprehensive plans covering all the places where our Indians are. This thing, after all, there are citizens, and we need to look after them or in the time of need. Okay, I'll give you another angle to this, which a lot of people don't agree with me. Role of media in this evacuations. I'll give you an example. When the Nepal earthquake took place, our aircraft were taking relief equipment, and we did a lot in Nepal earthquake. And so aircraft were coming empty. So suggestion was made, why don't we bring in people who are stuck there and this thing. So we started doing that. But the media gave so much of hype to this Indians being evacuated from there that it became that Indians are sending aircraft only to evacuate their people. The relief part really got left out. So my worry is if we overplay this card, like in Ukraine thing also, on so much that students are being evacuated. Of course, we did a lot. We sent 4 ministers through Poland, Romania, Hungary, everywhere. We facilitated. We did a lot. India, the government did a lot, and that is praiseworthy. But what I'm getting at is if the media overplays it, it becomes problematic in the sense like in this case also students got beaten up by Ukrainians saying that you are only bothered, your country is only bothered about you students and not about us. So what I'm saying is we should do all these things, but not overdo it. That's my view. A lot of people will not agree with it. Anyway, last lesson is that strategic coercion. That means posturing, exercising deployment. Okay, it works. Okay, and always when the things heat up, this starts off, and these are the telltale signs. So whenever these happen, we should be cautious. The next stage starts with cyber attacks, then the long range vectors, then the air power, and then the surface operation. These are the sequences, and always most of the cases we have seen that it happens like this. So in this case also, if you see the exercises that took this thing had started much months before that, lakh plus troops being positioned, 3,000 plus paratroopers, strategic bombers, and all these assets were used subsequently. So these are sort of indicators we should not take it so lightly. One, and secondly, so strategic coercion has got a lot of value. So like cyber attacks in this case, a lot of people are criticizing that cyber is I said earlier also, in this case a lot of cyber attacks took place. If one news report came from the west itself that on 24th when the action started, thousands of satcom terminals of the western countries were inoperative to cyber attack. Then some more reports have come about. Now slowly they're filtering in the cyber this thing, so we should need to take it seriously. Okay. Last point is about the nuclear deterrence, which I've already covered. I will not repeat it. That my view has changed after seeing this operation. That the nuclear deterrence is only for nuclear war and not for conventional war. I feel other way around now after seeing this. So these are the lessons as far as broad security concerned lessons are concerned. Aadi?
Some hard hitting lessons. So you mentioned a couple of things which actually popped up some thoughts in my mind. You mentioned about dependence on defense equipment. And we see this issue actually even in our neighborhood with regards to Saudi Arabia, which is facing a problem with the Americans today. And there's a seesaw battle in terms of, who kind of takes the cake right now because the Americans sold the weapons, then held back, and then so there's a bit of a challenge that side as well. It's not just India who's facing this issue. Saudis have their own issues. We've got our own, but the bottom line is defense equipment, and that's something which is interesting that you brought out, sir. Secondly, of course, the whole narrative war, and that's something which we've covered in this particular talk in much great detail. Only time will tell what exactly has happened on the ground, how much destruction has been done, what were the effectiveness of the weapons and stuff like that. Initially, I think it's all going to be quite a lot mixed up with the narratives. We've seen the photographs, we've seen the shoot downs, we've seen the DCS game images where supposedly a MiG-29 was fighting a Sukhoi. It's difficult for any layman, with respect, even a professional, to kind of distinguish between both of them. There are times that you get carried away with these images as well. So that's interesting.
Yeah, Adi, there are some more lessons related to warfare and air power. I'll just quickly run through them if you allow me.
Please, sir.
Yeah. So when you're talking just now, two things occurred to me very interesting. This is related to, like you just now said, that reliance on some country for weapons. Now, Saudi example you gave, they don't have their own defense industry. They buy from outside and they can afford to buy the latest. Now, it's a win-win situation for a country like America here. Okay, just think of it. Two things. One is win-win. Why I say win is, first win is, they get money. The defense industry flourishes. And second win is they get control of the country in the sense Tomorrow, when the war comes, they are reliant on your equipment. You have control over them a little bit. So these are the win-win situation. The another interesting thing which came to my mind when we are talking about this is, one of the angles in the whole thing when you see the amount of America going into various countries and bombarding the daylights out of them and going into countries which are not do not retaliate. There is a what is happening is the defense industry is flourishing here. The old weapons are getting consumed. The new ones demand comes up. Who's winning here? Who's gaining? Not winning. Who's gaining? So, in one of the writings, I found somebody mentioning that could be that the defense industry is very interested in this thing happening and maybe encouraging such sort of actions. Is by the way. Anyway, I'll quickly go through the. I think we have taken a long time. As far as warfare is concerned, lessons are very very straightforward and oft learned lessons. One is very clear, defined aim should be there. That means what is the objective, what is the aim, what is the objective, the political objective and military objective, political aim and military objective, military aim. And based on that, then you decide what strategy to use and how do you apply the power as well as air power. Like in this case, the objectives are different, but application is different. But why it is different, I've clarified to my mind why it is different. Okay, second is you mentioned it, very important human factor, morale, training, and tactics. Okay, you may give latest technology, you may give fanciest of the weapons, but if his just morale is down, his training is low, he will still make a hash of it, he'll lose. Okay, for doing well, you need morale, training, and tactics, and we are doing well in this ground on this ground. Okay, information warfare very very important. Is I don't have to stress anymore. You've seen what is happening in the narratives, public opinion being turned, morale of the forces, legitimacy we talked about. We'll talk about again. Okay, then next lesson is importance of deterrence and strategic coercion, which I mentioned earlier. Okay, legitimacy we talked about. In this case, both are trying to sell the legitimacy, West as well as East. Closer to home, examples 1971, we had legitimacy that the Pak atrocities in the West Bengal common people. Secondly, the refugee problem. Balakot, we had legitimacy. The target chosen was such that, this again, the terrorist camps. The joint warfare importance cannot be overemphasized. Joint planning, joint execution, joint review, joint structure, joint training, joint exercises is a must. Okay, theater command is being talked. So one of the ways of achieving jointness, not the way of. There are a lot of other factors which are required to this thing. Then ISR importance, touched upon, very very important. You have to, like what Russians achieved on the first day couldn't have been possible if they didn't have a good ISR. We need to invest on especially space-based ISR. Eyes in the high in the sky. Okay. Then collective security metrics is important because of int sharing. Like in this case, Ukraine is getting a lot of int from this thing. So similarly, if you have good relations with friendly countries who are good in ISR, they will be able to give you some information and int sharing. Quickly, I'll rush over air power specific this thing. So it has come out that air power is a very, very offensive weapon and effect-based operations it carries out. You cannot fight with the air power by tying the hands behind the back. Actually, that's what we have been doing. In Kargil, we did that. We imposed restrictions. Okay, that is not the way of using the air power. Okay, should not be, as far as possible, should be given a free hand. Secondly, very, very offensive in nature. Okay, even the air defense is offensive in nature. It is called offensive defense. So I come to the point here that the air defense operations or the campaign cannot be separated away from the offensive campaign or operations. It is all meshed together. And nowadays the aircraft are coming omni role, which in the same sortie they're carrying both weapons and carrying on both weapons. So this AD command business, which we have been talking about in our context, I think in my opinion is a non-starter and not viable. Okay, the ability to fight in all weather and night and day is very, very important, which one of the lessons which came out, some criticism came out that Russians are not fighting at night. And Air Force, Indian Air Force I'm talking about is done well in this count also. We had a very, very concerted effort towards building up this capability of modernization our airfields, our platforms capability and pilots or the crew capability to operate it. All sorts of this thing. No fly zone we already talked about. I'll not talk about. You should need to have capability in case you want to enforce it. two capabilities are very important, which has come out very strength 5 in this operation. One is precision and one is standoff. Correct. These two have been used maximum in this thing, especially in the urban warfare, also in grey zone operations, which we'll face in the future for punitive strikes. So we need to have capability as well as capacity. Capacity means numbers as well, not only capability of limited numbers. Both we need to have to deal with future threats. Then airborne, heliborne operations, vulnerabilities come out, whether true or not, what happened. But with these shoulder-fired missiles, your helicopters and transport are very, very vulnerable, especially if they are going into urban areas, and also another area is hills. We have a lot of hilly areas. Like Kargil also we lost two man pads. So the aircraft are flying in the valleys. It's like a narrow pathway going through. And if a chap is sitting on the hilltop with these shoulder-fired missiles, these aircraft will be sitting ducks. So we have to be careful. Even in insurgency operations where helicopters do a supporting role, they can get vulnerable. Okay. So last lesson, tactical or whatever you call it, is very important. Is the opening salvo in you see all the wars, all the this thing is a heavy bombardment through long range vectors, missiles, air launched weapons. You need to have protective infrastructure to protect your assets. And second thing is you need to disperse them, not put all your eggs in one basket. So you need to work towards it. So these are some of the war and airpower lessons specific, which I thought I will just tag them quickly. Aadi.
Thanks. I think they're very, very, very critical and informative because this is what is happening in front of us, and we would be fools not to learn from it. My whole idea of actually bringing about various different discussions with various different peoples is to bring about a different angle to these conversations. And at the end of it, one thing that I've kept common through and through is asking people, what can we learn? Each situation can be interpreted differently, and with the experience that a lot of people carry, especially yourself, sir, it'll be great to understand how Indian Air Force could actually benefit from this entire thing. Because it's a very, very nasty combination of words that I'm using, benefit from a war, but one has to be realistic, and we've got the security situation around us, which requires us to be on top of our game all the time. Sir, thank you so much for bringing about, I think, a very different angle of air war, which is not being put across. A very different angle on the convoy, the long line which is standing there. Everybody seems to call it a defeat of one or the other, but it needs a little more dwelling to understand what that convoy actually signifies, if actually it is real. That is also part of the narrative. But again, jokes apart, I think it's been a brilliant conversation, sir, because we're going to be learning quite a bit. And of course, I'd like to kind of book your little time post-war, post the dust is settled down, probably in the next month or so, where we could actually open the book and see what exactly happened. Because a lot of the reality and a lot of the true stories on the ground will start trickling out. Thank you once again, sir. Till next time for another subject. Jai Hind.
Thanks, Aadi. Thanks. I'll just clarify one thing. I didn't mean that the convoy is fake.
No.
And, I didn't mean that. What I meant was that it is uncamouflaged and is visible, and nobody will send such a huge military convoy if they are not sure that it will not get decimated. That's my point.
Absolutely.
That's what I was saying.
That's what I was saying.
Yeah. And in my opinion, the concluding thought is that, it's a deliberate restraint of not using air power by Russia rather than poor planning or execution. That's my bottom line as far as my view goes. Until we do the next one with you on the next interesting topic. Thanks a lot. Okay. And bye.
Thank you, sir. Bye-bye.